Now, your next page has spiritual disciplines on it. We want to talk briefly about them. And spiritual disciplines come into place when we realize that we cannot do what we're trying to do, and we want to take steps to be able to do that, because we know that God has told us to take steps. We know also we can't do it on our own, but we know we don't have to do it on our own. If we act, He will act with us. But now we are trying to do the things that we need to do to enable us to do what we cannot do by direct effort. That's the key problem here. And really all I have to say to you in this section is just to explain that to you. See, what do you do when you want to turn the other cheek, but you can't? You just can't. Maybe you've already smacked them before you thought about it, as we've been talking about. Right? Or maybe you haven't done that, but you just simply can't bring yourself to remain vulnerable because of your pain, or you just can't see how to do it. I mean, this is a complicated situation. You know, when you're down in the middle of the mess, there never are clear principles that really solve your problem. I mean, you may know the clear principles, but how they apply are often troublesome. And that's a part, I believe, of God's plan for us, that we would know how to trust Him and walk with Him, and not just try to boil this down to a set of rules. So what do you do when you can't do what Jesus said? The general rule now is don't try again. Trying again does not work well. In fact, it rarely works. And we say if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? You may just confirm your bad habits if you do that. You will discourage yourself. So the actual rule that you want to follow is, if at first you don't succeed, find out why you didn't succeed, and then try again. I was talking to someone who works in a jet laboratory out in California about this. He said, "Boy, you're sure right. If we have one explosion, we don't just try again." We find out what went wrong before we try again. Right? This is really true. What went wrong? And in order to do this, we need to be indirect, and we need to take Jesus as our example and follow Him into His practices, and not just keep trying to do what He said. And these practices really are what we have come to learn through the history of the church to regard as disciplines for the spiritual life. The second paragraph on that page, I try to tell you in general what a discipline is. A discipline is an activity that enables us to accomplish what we cannot do by direct effort. It's true of all disciplines. Whether it's speaking Spanish, playing piano, almost anything you can mention is learned in this way. Most things worth doing cannot be achieved by direct effort. We have to train ourselves for them. This conflicts with a lot of our ideas about the Christian life. It troubles many people's teaching of grace because they think it's somehow inconsistent with grace. I think wiser Christians have thought in terms of means to grace. That's an old Methodist phrase, means to grace. And so it doesn't set grace aside, but it recognizes that you must do something to receive grace. Again, that passivity-activity thing. A gift has to be received. Otherwise, it isn't a gift, it's an imposition. So the question is, what can we do to receive the grace of God, to then return to the things that we intend to do, that Christ has taught and shown us, and be able to do them? Well, let's be simple and illustrative. I've given you two lists of disciplines here, and I won't have time to talk about them at any length, maybe one or two if we have time. These are practices that are standard, fairly standard, recognized by everyone as things that one might do in order to put themselves in a position to do what they cannot do by direct effort. But let's just be illustrative. For example, in the little article that I handed out, I hope you all got one and maybe had a chance to read it about looking like Jesus. I'm not responsible for the artwork, by the way. I don't know where that stuff came from. But, and I don't think it's Jesus, and it's certainly not me. But I talk about, for example, hurry. Now, hurry is a burden to the human soul. It's a crushing burden. And my grandmother used to tell me that idleness was the devil's workshop, but I tell you, I found a more fruitful workshop than the idleness, and that is hurry. I've tucked in towards the back of here a little sheet just on that I use in workshops about how to get the urgent off your back. But if you are in a hurry, you are going to find it very difficult to walk in the kingdom with Christ. If you're in a hurry. And you will find it very difficult to be loving to people, to be kind. Pretty certainly you will carry some degree of anger with you. You rarely find a person in a hurry who is not at least mildly angry and on the verge of seriously angry. And that's because, you see, hurry always comes out of a sense that we have more to do than we can get done. And we're trying to do something we can't do, and it frustrates our will. And then we're prepared to cut all sorts of corners, get angry, blame people, justify things that we wouldn't think of trying to justify in other circumstances, and so on. And so I encourage people to try to learn to live without hurry. Now, it isn't hair-splitting to say that you can act quickly and not be in a hurry. Hurry is an attitude. And hurry always has this element of being strangled and choked and repressed by having to do things you cannot get done. And you need to think deeply about the theology that lies back of hurry. Because the theology that lies back of hurry is accusatory of God. It is essentially saying God is holding me responsible for more than I can do. And we have to break the grip of that. The way to break the grip of hurry is solitude. If you learn to practice solitude and silence, you will break the grip of hurry. Because hurry is a habit. That's all it is. And you don't have to live in a hurry. And I say once again, I encourage you to come to the place to where you never hurry. And when you're tempted to hurry, just release it to God. And here's the word of the prophet Isaiah. They that believe shall not make haste. They that believe shall not make haste. I've given you the references to that on the sheet back here, and you can look that up. What is solitude? Well, solitude is breaking the relationships that govern us and drive us and jerk us around and hold us to expectations and so on. Just stepping out of those. Stepping out of those relationships and going to where you are alone. Go to a place where you're alone and you leave your work home. And it's hard to start practicing solitude at home because all your work is there. So that's one reason why you need to get away. And you have to fight all sorts of things like, oh, this is just self-indulgence and all that sort of thing, and you're lazy or you'd be working, and you have all that stuff. And you're making a deep choice now about the character of your spiritual life. Busyness is an ego thing. Hurry is an ego thing. You know, it really is. Don't bother me, I'm busy. You're probably the very person that should be bothered. Right? But that's what we say. Or she's very important. I mean, don't bother her. She's busy. And so on. But solitude is where we choose to step out of the entanglements of ordinary life and come to the place to where we can be driven by what is between us and God and what is in our heart. And that means that we lay down all of the assignments. When you go into solitude, don't take work with you. Don't take things that you have in mind to do. You go into solitude, and please forgive me, you go into solitude to do nothing. To do nothing. And since I have so little time, let me just tell you that I encourage also people to have times every week when they do nothing. I don't mean 15 minutes. I'm talking 3 hours. Now you'll immediately say to me, I don't have time for that. Right? Well, the deepest challenge to our faith is in terms of our time. The deepest challenge to what we believe is important is in terms of our time. If you believe it is important for you to be able to calmly and strongly live in the kingdom that Jesus has opened to you, then you will believe you have time to do what is necessary to enable you to do that. This is why solitude is, I believe, the fundamental spiritual discipline. Whenever you get ready to really follow Christ into his teachings as his disciple, most everyone, though I certainly don't make laws about this or say, because, none of the disciplines are laws. Disciplines are wisdom. They're not laws. They're not laws of righteousness. But when you are ready to follow Christ into these things, and now go back over when you want it and when you intend it, and you've signed up as his apprentice, then your next step is to do whatever is necessary to bring it to pass. And I'm suggesting to you that disciplines for the spiritual life are precisely the things that will do that. There's no formula. There's no mechanism. This is a personal walk with the Lord. There are all sorts of things that we could talk about how to use them and how not to use them. You don't want to ever start feeling righteous because you do them or unrighteous because you don't do them. When you get in trouble with them, you don't push them, you back out and you learn how to do them better. For example, if you go into solitude and you begin to feel a little crazy, back out. Silence the same way. It disorients you. It'll disorient you. It's supposed to, in a sense, disorient you. That's, in a sense, the whole point. But if it begins to be something that's too hard for you to take and you begin pushing yourself, stop. There's a very important rule about spiritual disciplines. Never be a hero. Never be a hero. And with reference to the disciplines of abstinence on the left hand of your page there, those are especially important. Never be a hero. Don't get ego attached to it. I don't know how many times I have friends who have set long fast for themselves, and towards the end something came up where it was reasonable and right for them to break their fast. Aunt Virginia came in from Indianapolis. And so what are you going to do? Sit there and fast while you feed Aunt Virginia. Well, the Desert Fathers and Mothers worked out a long time ago that it's much more important to be hospitable than it is to keep your fast going. You can always start another fast. Right? And I think this happens often because God knows they could not have stood to have finished that fast. They've been too hard on their ego. So he lets them break it, leads them into the breaking of it. And the disciplines are activities that you exploratorily approach. You say, what is in this for me? And you learn how to carry through with them in a way that are good for you. Solitude, silence, fasting, frugality, which is really dispensing with things that are an indulgence to your senses and your ego. Chastity, refraining from sexual thoughts, deeds, and actions for a period of time. And see, all of these, again, there's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with solitude. With being with people. There's nothing wrong with talking. There's nothing wrong with food. That isn't the point. Secrecy, a very important discipline that Jesus teaches in Matthew 6. Secrecy is a teaching about how we do things before the Lord. We don't do them before men to be seen of them. In all of these areas, again, there's nothing wrong with someone knowing your good works, but if you're dependent on praise, then that needs to be broken, and secrecy enables you to do that. In secrecy, you do good deeds without letting people know who did them. And you practice standing before the Lord. Now, just finally for this segment, if you look at the next page after this, you have a little diagram here. I call this golden triangle of spiritual transformation. And you'll see that this puts planned disciplines in a three-angled procedure. And this brings together all of the elements that will give you a plan for spiritual formation. And then you will be able to carry out your part in spiritual formation. You see at the top, it's the work of the Spirit. The new birth, the fruit of the Spirit. You could mention other aspects of the Spirit. That's crucial, isn't it? The left-hand corner over here, ordinary events of life. This is where we are disciples, is in the ordinary events of life. These are sometimes called trials and temptations. James says, let these trials have their way. Count it all joy when you fall into all kinds of temptations and trials. Why? Because you're going to see the kingdom of God in them. Now, you may not succeed with that too well if you don't have a planned, disciplined, regular activity result in your life. You know, at this point in my life, folks, I can't baloney you. I don't have anything to gain from that. And I will tell you this works. I just want to read a letter that came to me over the email here at home, and I don't know this guy from Kingdom Come, as they say. Here's what he says. Dear Dallas, 6 months ago when I read the preface to The Spirit of the Disciplines, I saw my life as it could be, and that night I prayed with tears, Lord, this is the life I've always wanted to live. Please let what this guy is claiming be true. Recently, a very close friend, one who knows the darkest secret sides of me, invited me to a restaurant to have dinner with him, and during the meal he said, John, do you know what you are? You are the master of change. And then he went on to speak encouragingly about how aware he was of the fact that I had suddenly, and I do love this sentence, I suddenly had the power to shed off specific sin patterns that had been defeating me for over 16 years. My new identity testifies that what you claimed in the book is in fact true. What did I claim in the book? Simply what I've told you just in these few minutes about spiritual disciplines. They work. They are proven. It's not a question of will they work, or they've been proven for generation after generation after generation. They will work for you. It doesn't require that you have complete information about them. If you will simply take the little information I've given you here and begin to put them into practice, you will find their power. They are self-verifying. And on the other hand, no matter how much anyone talks at you about them, without putting into practice, they'll mean nothing. But if you put them into practice, you will find, and the reason they work is because Christ meets you in them. And you give the time to Him, and it just works. So I encourage you to think around that now, and as you look back over the main units, we've completed now the main units of what I have to say to you. We'll talk in the very last half hour or so about a specific plan for one day, but now we want to back up and have a little question time and see where you want to go with it.